Hello, my name is Corey, and today I'm going to talk about how I use drum samples in the context of an entire mix. So what we're looking at here is Pro Tools, and we're looking at my drum template. So this is a template I use when I'm tracking and when I'm mixing. I use this all the time, and the reason why I use it is because I have everything pre-routed. I basically took the time up front to create a template where I've routed everything that I assume I will use or that I normally use, and I've built this template through experience. There's always little things that I change and add to kind of tweak and maximize the efficiency within it, but what it lets me do is it lets me mix drums quickly, and it lets me lay down samples quickly, and that has tons of value for me. So what I'm using to lay down the samples is Steven Slate Trigger 2. I believe this is the EX version. I purchased this several years ago and have never upgraded, but honestly, it's totally worked and it's done everything I needed to do, so I have definitely got my money's worth out of this plugin. So within my template, I have my kick routed to these first two purple aux tracks, and then I have my snare routed to these aux tracks. So I made them bright purple right now just so you can see which tracks have the trigger on them. I guess before we get into that, let me just show you what the drums sound like as is without any drum samples. Sounds pretty badass. Drummer John killed it. He plays in a band called Nighttime in Kansas, and I recorded these drums with him and his band about a week ago, and it was a great experience overall. So, drums already sound good. I'm still going to lay down some drum samples in case I want to use them come mix time. What I do differently than a lot of people I see is instead of laying down a kick sample that has maybe a kick in, a kick overhead mic, and a kick room all in one sample and print it and commit it to one audio track, I like to keep them isolated and separate. So you can see here, this purple track here is kick in, and then this is kick OH, kick overhead, and then sample. And then if you look at the snare, I have snare sample, snare overhead sample, snare room sample. I'll show you why I do that in a minute. Let's jump into our mix window and look at the trigger plugin, what samples are we using. So I have a collection of samples I've purchased over time, as well as samples I've created myself. I have samples preloaded on these trigger tracks, and I have all the parameters set. So as long as my kick is hitting just above green in the yellow, this usually samples pretty accurately, and that is a huge benefit of having this session set up the way it is. I also realized on this kick track, apparently, that my samples were out of phase with my 3 kick microphones. So I flipped the phase here, as you can see. All right, so let's get into the actual sound of the samples. So over here, and the kick in, just the first one, it's a kick in and a kick out microphone, but it sounds a little something like this. Sounds like a kick drum, sounds like a kick sample, nothing too crazy. And then I have this kick overhead. Got a weird high thing going on, but doesn't matter in the context of the entire mix. I'm going to turn these down to 0, and I'm going to just listen to the mix, and I'm going to bring them in, and we're going to hear the difference that they make. So right there, that's adding a lot of consistency, and it's kind of making the snap a little bit more apparent, and again, consistent throughout, which is cool. You see, though, it's not completely taking over the kick drum sound, which is great. So it's there to reinforce, and it's there to help out. So let's see what this overhead sample sounds like. Definitely brightening it up. Again, it's adding consistency to the snap, but it's also kind of creating the illusion of like a 3D kick drum, which is great because it's a stereo sample. So it gives me the flexibility in post to kind of turn up the ambience a little bit of the kick drum without bringing up the bleed of all the cymbals that would come naturally from these room microphones. So that's that. That's the kick drum. Sounds good to me. The next step I would do would be to commit the drums. or commit the sample, sorry, to audio, and then I never have to worry about them again. They're printed. Yeah, and that's that. So let's move on to the snare drum here because it's a little bit more elaborate. So I have the snare, and again, I believe I mentioned this, but just to reinforce it, I have my kick automatically in my template sent pre-fader to these aux tracks. So everything is already routed, and there's usually a sample setup on it. So as long as I'm hitting an appropriate volume on here, my sample is live, and I can quickly swap them out, and it makes it really quick and really easy. So the same thing's done on my snare. It's sent through the snare send, and it's being received by these 3 aux tracks over here. 1 mono, 2 stereo, the mono one being the snare top and bottom sample. So let's see what this is like. So we have, if I open this guy up, that's an awesome sounding sample, and that's the bottom snare for that snare. I guess I'll show you what the individual samples kind of sound like. Nothing too crazy. I probably could add a little bit more, 200 or something crazy. I already got a bunch on there. Whatever. Sounds good. Yeah, this third one, which I don't have on the kick, is basically it's like a room sample that's blended in with a reverb effects, and I use it sparingly, but I like to have it printed in case there's like a drum fill that ends on like a flam, and I can kind of just use that as like a production effect and throw it in really quickly. But I'll probably have this one pretty low in the mix. But let's turn them all down, play the track, and hear how they sound when I bring them in individually. It's not doing a whole lot, but it's definitely making a difference, and I like it. It sounds good. This one's not doing a whole lot for me, but I'll kind of leave it where it is, and let's see this room. That makes a huge difference. And you can tell that the drums were recorded in a large tracking room. And the great thing about having this room sample is it actually kind of blends in with the room sound. So if I were to, here, let's backtrack a little bit. The drummer is playing a straightforward kind of kick, snare, hi-hat beat. If the drummer were to be playing like a crash beat and there's crashes washing out, if I were to turn up the room microphones, you would get a lot of cymbal wash. So I think it's really, really effective to have a isolated room sample or overhead sample that you can turn up when you need to. So you can add to the large drum room sound without having your mix turn to mush from all the horrible cymbal wash. So huge advantage to having these. So that's how I would sample my kick and snare. So let's hear it in context. Depending on what you're going for, if you want the drums to be a lot punchier and you want to make it sound like the drummer's hitting a little harder, you can turn those samples up a touch. If you want it to be a little softer or smoother, I know this song's a little bit more laid back. But yeah, that's how I would lay down samples. And again, I would commit them. So I'm rocking Pro Tools 12 here, so I can just hit commit. They will render. It will freeze. It will continue. Bang, bang. They're there. Just double check that there's nothing wacky, crazy going on. Looks pretty good to me. And you should go through and check all the hits. Anyways, comment on what you'd like to see me touch on next. If you have any questions, feel free to hit me up. I have a Facebook group that I'll leave a link to in the description below, and it's just an audio engineering community. So if you have any questions, you can reach me there. Be sure to subscribe, and thank you for watching.